Hey y'all, the Paranormal Chick here. Welcome to episode 4 of my podcast. Today we are talking dogmen, werewolves, and skinwalkers. And the number one question that I always asked, are they all the same? Honestly, it's a loaded question, and it truly depends on the culture you're studying. For now, I'll stick to the general assumption of which each being is, and that is for werewolves. Werewolves are basically a human being that takes the form of a wolf. So think shapeshifter. They can be naturally born, created by two different werewolves, or bitten, which is created by another were they were bitten or attacked. A dogman is said to be a true wolf-man hybrid that some say does not shift back to a human form but stays the wolf-man beast. And finally, skinwalkers. So this is where a lot of the misconception comes from. Skinwalkers derives from the Native American legends. They're of evil medicine men who take the skin of animals. Predominantly it is wolves, but it's also known as other animals, could be coyotes, bears, but they take the skin of the animal to transform into a beast. But they are considered evil medicine men. So that's the difference between all three. Pulp culture. Now, for pulp culture references, pretty much everybody references werewolves, skinwalkers as dogmen. It's fair to note werewolves or lycanthropy have been around longer than the term dogmen. The term dogmen was coined actually here in the United States in Michigan, where we had the first reportings of the Michigan dogmen. Werewolves, or the term lycanthropy, actually goes back to antiquity. The really truly crazy part about all of this is it's a worldwide belief. It could be a dogman, werewolf, but it's a worldwide belief of these encounters and sightings, and they go back centuries in all different types of cultures around the world. I mean, is the whole world lying about werewolves? Is it like a worldwide mass hysteria? You'll have to decide for yourself. But the US, we have our own legends of werewolves and dogmen, and that's exactly what I'm going to chat about now. There's two famous legends that have fallen to the wayside that I'm going to tell you about, and then I'll end it with witness accounts and testimonies, which I find fascinating. But let's kick it off. The long forgotten legend of Georgia's real-life werewolf, and it was a woman. Her name was Emily Isabella Burt, fondly known as Emmy. She was born July 29, 1841, and died June 18, 1911. Emily was the shyest and most reserved child of the wealthy family, the Burt family, prominent members of a town now known as Woodland. When Emily's father died, he left a hefty sum of money behind, and rather than spend her days looking after the children, Emily's mother, Mildred Owen Burt, shipped them off to a boarding school in Europe, freeing her to spend her days chatting with other socialites. Emily returned home, and it wasn't long before the rest of her family started to notice that something about her wasn't quite right. She looked sickly and had a million-mile stare, and complained that she was unable to sleep. As the days wore on, her mother began to realize that Emily had been slipping off into the nearby forest in the middle of the night. When confronted, Emily claimed that she couldn't recall most of her midnight strolls. To make matters worse, she started to grow unsightly hair in odd places, and even strangers noticed that her teeth began to look more pointed, almost as if she was growing fangs. Mildred wrote that the odd changes off as puberty, and vowed to keep a closer eye on her daughter. Coincidentally, local farmers were dealing with some strange problems of their own. Throughout Talbot County, farmers were waking in the morning to find their fields littered with mangled corpses of their livestock, seemingly the victims of wolf attacks. Together, the farmers concocted a plan to end the slayings once and for all and they started nightly hunting parties with the intention of capturing or killing the beast or beasts responsible. After weeks of failed attempts to slay the phantom wolf, the farmers were frustrated. They were at their wits' end, so they finally asked the town's recluse for help. Mind you, small towns, being a recluse, that's already a stigma, and people whispered about the strange old man from Eastern Europe. Some claimed that he dabbled in black magic, others said he was just crazy, but either way, he was an outsider. And when the first animal mutilations began to occur, no one actually listened to him when he said he knew what the creature was. And according to him, it was no regular animal, it was a werewolf. With little else to go on and scores of dead animals to deal with, the farmers were finally ready to listen. Tracking the beast on any old night was a fruitless effort, the old man told them. Instead, they were to wait until the next full moon to resume their hunt. In the meantime, the old man instructed the farmers to take every silver crucifix they could find, melt them down, and use the metal to fashion bullets. As strange as his advice was, the farmers were out of options and did as they were told. Several weeks later, the group took to their fields by the light of the moon. Just as the old man said, the hunting party came across a frightening salute lurking in the distance. The creature was as big as a man, had a long snout, and walked on two legs. As its wolf-like ears twitched in the moonlight, the hunting party raised their rifles and took aim at the monster. Gunshots filled the night air. The werewolf let out a painful scream and fled into the forest. No one was sure where the creature was hid, but the old man's crazy plan had worked. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to the celebrating farmers, there was another hunt happening in that very same area. Mildred Owen Burt woke to the sound of gunshots, and only to discover that Emily's bed was empty. Determined to get to the bottom of her daughter's secretive midnight adventures, she lit a lantern and headed into the forest. After searching high and low, Mildred stumbled onto Emily's unconscious body. A pool of blood surrounded her hand, and it appeared that she had been shot. Mildred did her best to stop the bleeding and ran for help. The following day, the local doctor patched up Emily's wounds, but even he couldn't explain what had happened. After the rumors of Emily's accident and the farmer's successful werewolf hunt began to collide in the local taverns, Mildred discovered a doctor in Paris who claimed to specialize in lycanthropy, with the sinking suspicion that Emily might be to blame for the rash of animal mutilations. Mildred sent her off to Paris in the hopes that she might be cured. And according to all the legends, the attacks completely ceased from then on. Several years later, Emily Isabella Burt returned to Georgia. She was cured of her mysterious ailment and lived out the rest of her life as a successful businesswoman and landlord. To this day, there are numerous reports that the ghostly report of Emily Isabella Burt still roams the countryside by the light of the full moon. That's Emily's story. Whether it's true or just superstition, we'll never know, but there truly was an Emily Isabella Burt, and you can see her gravestone if you so choose to. The next legend, this one comes out of Pennsylvania, old Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania Wilds. It's a legend of Cook Forest Werewolf. And this was written by Lou Bernard. He was told by an old folklore historian who passed down the story, and he thankfully wrote it down. It begins in the 1940s. People reported seeing an odd creature in Cook Forest and in old Pennsylvania wilds. They described it as hairy and very quick, disappearing into the trees after one quick glimpse. The creature came to be known as the Clarion What Is It? Simply because no one could get a clear glimpse of it. But as the legend goes, it begins with a woman. Her name was Elizabeth Paul. Elizabeth didn't live in Clarion County at that time. She actually lived outside the Pennsylvania Wilds on a farm in Northumberland County. At the time, she was a young woman. This would have been about 1830. Elizabeth was in love with a much older man. That bothered her family. What bothered them even more was that he was purported to be a werewolf. The two of them would meet up at night, though clearly not when it was a full moon. They would sit on a fallen log and talk for hours, watching the family's flock of sheep. Her family wasn't exactly thrilled with this, but because of the man's company, their sheep never got attacked by the local wolf packs, so they tolerated it. Believe it or not, during those times, wolf attacks on livestock was a serious problem. It got to the point that farmers were offering rewards for dead wolves. One night, one of the local men shot a wolf that he saw. He was hoping to collect the reward. It was described as bigger than usual and odd-looking. It was wounded and staggered off into the forest. The next morning, he went looking for it. And as the story goes, the man went to find the wolf for the $25 reward, tracking it by blood. He didn't find a wolf, not exactly. He found Elizabeth's old boyfriend lying dead. Per the legend, he stated, he was lying on his back, shot through the heart. I noticed that his teeth were long and yellow like a wolf's, and that there were stiff hairs on the underside of his hands and on the soles of his feet. The man was buried where he had fallen. And even though he was dead, Elizabeth and her family seemed to get sort of a residue protection from the local wolf packs. It appears that the wolves felt kind of like a loyalty towards Elizabeth's family, and they never lost sheep to wolves again. Elizabeth Paul, believe it or not, was not a fictional person. Her family appears in property records from the area. Records show that she was born about 1811, and as she grew up, Elizabeth got married and moved to Clarendon County about 1850. She died there in 1905 and was buried near Cook Forest. So those are two really old legends of werewolves that have been lost to the ages. I hope you love them. But these next accounts, they're actually witness testimonies and witness accounts of what they saw, heard, and felt. The first witness testimony is John. John is from the Twin Cities metro area in Minnesota. His family had a cabin in the woods near Siren, Wisconsin. He describes growing up in the woods and being very comfortable outdoors from a young age. However, that would all change after a scary experience. He was playing with airsoft guns with his cousin a few years ago when they were kids. They were running around the cabin, and when John decided to make use of the camouflage coat he was wearing and ran into the woods to try and get an advantage. After playing and running for some time, he called a timeout to catch his breath. It was at that point that he noticed the woods had become silent. He knew from his experience in the woods that this means that there's a predator around. In Wisconsin, that could be anything. It could be a bear, wolf, coyote, or even a mountain lion. But according to John, what he saw didn't fit any of those things. He was scanning a clearing with his eyes, looking left to right, trying to spot what could be out there. He had the feeling of being watched. His eyes locked on a tall figure. He said at first he noticed the white of the canine-like teeth. John and his cousin ran as fast as they could out of the woods. The creature followed them, almost catching them at times. When they got to the tree line, almost back to the cabin, the animal broke off and returned to the thick of the woods. They ran to their cabin and they told their grandparents that they had seen a bear because they knew no one would believe them. Later, John told his mother that he saw something that was strange and terrifying in the woods. He told his mom it wasn't a bear, and it looked like something more sinister. That's when she told her son she had a similar encounter in the woods years ago. She was driving her car on a back road at night when she saw what looked like a wolf standing in the middle of the road. Only it was twice the size of a wolf, and it looked evil, and it charged her car. She was able to get away unhurt, but she was shaking up following that. That's John and his mom's story. I find it interesting and peculiar. We know natural wolves are fast, and if the myths and legends are true, then werewolves are 10 times faster and almost have like superhuman strength. It almost sounds like it was playing with them. That's my thought. The next witness account. This happened in Lansing, May of 2006 in Michigan. The report is noted as follows. On May 6, 2006, Ron was driving back to his girlfriend's house, who lives around Lansing, Michigan. He was coming back from the store, and she lives out in the country, completely isolated, so the only way to get out there is down dirt roads that are surrounded by fields. Ron was driving and saw something moving up on a little hill that was on the right side of the road, so he stopped. Suddenly, a human-like hand, except much larger than a normal man's hand, reached over the edge of the hill, and this huge silhouette came into view. It was much larger than a normal man, and it had a wolf-like face, and its eyes reflected in its headlights. It just sat there and looked across the field on the other side of the road, and then it just very calmly turned its head and looked right at Ron. He froze from fear. They were locked in each other's stare for about 20 seconds, and then it started down the hill. So Ron hit the gas and flew past it to get to the stop sign. He stopped and looked in the rearview mirror, and it was sitting in the middle of the road just looking at the car. Ron took off again, and as he was driving, he proceeded to look back, and it had moved very calmly into the other side of the field. After getting to his girlfriend's house, they went back to the spot, but the creature was already gone. Again, this happened between Lansing and the small town of Eaton Rapids. The next sighting comes out of Wisconsin. Another Bray Road sighting. This was in 2004. A 45-year-old registered nurse from Greendale and her 14-year-old daughter and 14-year-old friend saw what was definitely the Wolfman while driving down Bray Road about 8:30 p.m. on October 30th, 2004. For the sole purpose of trying to scare the daughter's friend Kevin, the woman is trained in autonomy, psychology, and kinesiology, and they estimate that the creature was no further than 9 feet away from them and illuminated in the headlights of their car. We had been looking for it for years, said the woman. Kevin had never been to Bray Road, so her daughter wanted to scare him. They had arrived about 8:30, drove up and down the road a few times, drove around Browers Road and back onto Bray Road, driving slowly and under the speed limit, when something popped out of the corn about 2 miles down the road, headed towards Elkhorn. It stepped right out of the corn and it looked aggressive. We all screamed very loudly, and she said she even put her foot on the gas and went as fast as she could and did not go back. What she saw doesn't make sense. Its legs were backward, but the creature had large, powerful thighs, and its knee was backward. It was covered in fur with heavier fur on its back. It was dark in color but tipped in silver gray. It was in the oncoming lane of traffic, so they were less than 9 feet away from the creature. It was not a person in a suit. It was way too tall, about 7 feet, and way too muscular. Its eyes were glittery and dark. It had no whites like human eyes, and a mask would have. Its head was big, almost too big for its body. It had an elongated snout, but pointy, not rounded like a dog. It stood there, hunched over in an aggressive stance. Its arms were bent at the elbow and forward. Its ears were pointed and shaped like a German shepherd's, but laid back. It was looking right at them, and they all felt it like it was aggressive, and it would defend itself viciously. This wasn't a dog or a wolf. It had canine features, but it was something else, something different, yet the same. It was truly a wolf man. They all had the feeling that they were not safe. They didn't get a picture, although they all had cameras ready, the car, video, digital camera, disposable camera. They were literally prepared for it. But when they saw it, they just screamed. And the mother just floored the gas. It was that flight or fight instinct that kicked in. The woman said she was not drinking any alcohol and does not do drugs. She's had a few incidents in her life she considers somewhat paranormal, but has never seen anything definite like that. All three witnesses saw the creature at the same time and agreed on its appearance. That is probably one of the best descriptions ever given of the Wolf of Bray Road. It really is. But again, you'll have to decide. Now, the following two separate witness testimonies were given to journalist Norman McFadden. This is Missouri. Lincoln County's werewolf. The first story is by Lily. Lily is a married woman with 2 children, a girl and a boy. They live out on Highway Y north of Troy, Missouri. One of Lily's favorite things to do is to take a long walk every night along the cliffs that run above Sugar Creek. She would usually wait for her husband to get home so that he could watch the children while she walked and took in the peacefulness and the beauty of nature. She basically decompressed. One evening, a couple of years back, her husband was running late getting home, so she waited and went for her walk when he arrived. It is fair to note that it's actually much later than what she would typically go. She still decided to go. She hopped in the car and headed down to Park Drive Road and followed it to the lot at the Sugar Creek Trails. She parked the car and headed to a trail that she knew well. The trail starts off going down a big hill, then veers left and up over another hill. At the top of that hill, you go right on a different trail that takes you to the cliffs overlooking Sugar Creek. At the top of the cliffs, Lily sat down to enjoy the sunset view. Though the sun had already set, there's still plenty of light and the moon was already high and full. After a few minutes, Lily began to realize that she was hearing something coming through the woods on the other side of the creek. It was like something that she had never seen before, and she hid. She quickly got up and hid behind a tree so she could watch what the creature was doing. And as she watched, she realized that it appeared to be half wolf, half man. She told the reporter how she remembered standing there, hiding behind the tree, thinking how crazy it was. How crazy that she was watching this and it was really happening. Lily watched as it crept out of the woods on all fours, but then it stood on its 2 hind legs as it went into the water. It seemed to be about 7 feet tall. The creature jumped around, splashing in the creek like it was trying to grab fish. But suddenly it froze and pointed its nose skyward and began sniffing. Then it looked right at her. The beast's eyes glowed red like something straight from the pits of hell. The beast howled, a horrific sound like something she had never heard before, and ran for the cliff right below where she was hiding. She remembered that she had her .22 in her pack, so she pulled it out and fired 2 rounds at the creature. It immediately fell back from where it was climbing, about 10 feet up from the creek, and it behaved like it had been hit, and she was almost certain that she saw blood in the water. It turned around and headed for the further back and pulled itself out of the water, raised itself back up on its back legs, howled again, which scared Lily to death. She continued to watch it, frozen as it dropped back down on all fours and scrambled back into the woods that it had come from. She turned and ran all the way back to her car and rushed home. To this day, she has not returned to walk in Sugar Creek trails. The second witness. Now, this is later on. They are not connected, but this is the second witness to a werewolf from the same area. Mr. Billy Dogman. He's retired and spends a good amount of his time out gathering rock fossils. He likes to walk the creek beds because that's where he finds most of his best rocks. Late one afternoon, he decided to go out to Sugar Creek off Highway KK and walk it for fossils. It was a cool afternoon and it had rained the day before. And after a good rain, you can find the best rocks from the water turning over the creek bed. He parked his car and started walking southeast along the creek. He had gathered a few nice fossils when he realized that it was starting to get dark. The dark really didn't bother him. He had his flashlight and he knew the area well enough to find his way. He continued along the creek, shining his flashlight on the rocks, when he came to a deep part of the creek with the high cliffs on one side. A strange noise was coming from further up the river and made him stop and listen. It was like a wolf howling at the moon. He looked up and noticed that the moon was big and full, and that sound started coming towards him, and fast. Mr. Dogman said that he ran to the side of the creek, lay down flat in some weeds. He could just barely see the creature as it came to the deep pool in the creek, but it seemed to be a wolf man of about 7 or so feet tall and was walking on his hind legs. It stopped in the deeper water and looked around, its nose in the air sniffing. He thought it was going to sniff him out of his hiding place, but it lost interest and it began splashing around like it was trying to grab fish, or maybe it was just washing himself. He didn't know. He actually really didn't care. He just wanted it to leave so he could get out of there and get home where he would be safe. It splashed around for about 15 minutes before moving back up the creek the way it had come. He had waited until he couldn't hear it anymore before jumping up and getting back into his car as fast as he could. Those two witness accounts I find crazy fascinating. First, they're in the same area, witnessed by two different people from two different backgrounds, but they kind of describe the same type of creatures, down to the same height. I don't know. Anybody from that area, you'll have to tell me if there are more stories or more witness accounts, but I find it very interesting. Like I said, there are hundreds and hundreds of reports of encounters and sightings like these that go back hundreds of years. Is it all just myth and legend? But if they are, then why are the sightings still happening? You'll have to decide for yourself what's true and what's not. But that's all I have for you tonight. And as always, I want to hear what you think. I want to hear it all. The good, the bad, and the ugly. And you can watch this full episode on my YouTube channel at The Paranormal Chick. And if you have any experience or your own story that you would like to share, please, I would love to hear it. I would love to tell the world about it. You can remain anonymous. Send them to me. My email is theparanormalchick@gmail.com, and chick is CHIC. Until tomorrow, my friends, stay safe.